Tears filled his eyes in a desperate plea for mercy. But Officer Kevin Bradshaw leaned back in his oak chair with a tight-lipped, triumphant grin. He watched the black woman he had handcuffed earlier take her seat at the defendant's table, confident that his fabricated resisting arrest and disorderly conduct charges would break her. Here, he had the badge. He had the power. What Bradshaw did not have, however, was a clue. Because when the heavy mahogany door swung open and the veteran presiding judge took the bench, the very first words echoing through the dead silent room were not directed at Bradshaw or the prosecutor. They were directed at the woman Bradshaw had targeted. And those two words instantly sealed his fate. Sunlight carved harsh, dusty lines of light through the high-arched windows of the downtown municipal courthouse in Philadelphia. The ambient noise was a low, stressful hum of nervous defendants whispering to overworked public defenders. Sitting alone at the defense table was Denise Harper. She wore a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit that spoke of quiet authority, though her demeanor was entirely unreadable. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, resting on a pristine manila folder. There was no attorney beside her. She had filed her appearance pro se, representing herself. To the casual observer, she was just another citizen caught in the crushing, impersonal gears of the justice system. To Officer Kevin Bradshaw of the Philadelphia Police Department, she was just another notch on his belt. Bradshaw sat a few rows back in the gallery, waiting for the case to be called. He was a man deeply in love with his own reflection, sporting a high and tight haircut, arms crossed over his tactical vest, and a demeanor that reeked of unearned superiority. Beside him sat Assistant District Attorney Scott Riley, a young prosecutor fresh out of law school, desperate for trial experience and completely reliant on police testimony to make his cases. "I'm telling you, Scott, this one's a layup," Bradshaw whispered loudly, ensuring his voice carried just enough to be heard by the rows ahead of him. She got mouthy during a routine stop, refused lawful orders. Classic entitlement. She thought because she drives a nice Mercedes she doesn't have to listen to the police. I put her on the pavement to teach her a lesson in compliance. Riley nervously adjusted his tie, glancing at the back of Denise's head. She didn't request a public defender. She's going pro OC. Did she say what she does for a living during booking? Bradshaw scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Who cares? Probably some mid-level manager who thinks she knows the law because she watches crime shows. I checked her ID, Denise Harper. No warrants, clean record. But she caught an attitude. I had to secure the scene. You know how these people get. The phrase, "these people," hung in the air. A poisonous little tell that revealed everything about Bradshaw's policing philosophy. He had a reputation in the department, a file full of civilian complaints regarding excessive force and racial profiling. But the union was strong and his captain was old school, so the complaints were routinely buried in the basement of internal affairs. Bradshaw operated under the assumption that the blue wall of silence would always hold, and that a judge would always take a sworn officer's word over a black woman sitting at the defendant's table. What Bradshaw did not know was that Denise Harper was not a mid-level manager. She was the Honorable Denise Harper, a recently appointed federal judge for the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, and a former high-profile civil rights litigator. She possessed a mind like a steel trap, and a deeply rooted, intimate understanding of the law that eclipsed the entire municipal building combined. When Bradshaw pulled her over for allegedly rolling through a stop sign, a sign she had explicitly stopped at for a full stop, she had made a tactical decision. When Bradshaw approached her window, aggressively demanding her license and registration while shining his maglite directly into her eyes, she had not flashed her federal credentials. When he ordered her out of the car for moving suspiciously, she had not screamed her title. And when he forcefully shoved her against the side of her own vehicle, slapping cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists, tight enough to leave deep purple bruises, she had remained entirely silent. She knew that if she declared she was a federal judge, the encounter would end immediately. Bradshaw would apologize, backpedal, and let her go. He would live to abuse his power another day, targeting someone who did not have the shield of a judicial title. Denise did not want him to apologize. She wanted to catch him. She wanted him under oath. "All rise," the bailiff's voice bellowed, shattering the low murmur of the room. "The municipal court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Harold Benson presiding." Judge Benson emerged from chambers, the heavy black robe billowing slightly around his tall, imposing frame. Benson was a veteran of the bench, a man known for his razor-sharp intellect and absolute intolerance for courtroom theatrics. He adjusted his reading glasses, sat down heavily in his high-backed leather chair, and opened the morning docket. "Let's get through those preliminary motions," Benson grumbled, his voice a low baritone. He had not yet looked up at the tables. "Call the first case." Ada Scott Riley popped up like a jack-in-the-box. State of Philadelphia versus Denise Harper. Docket number 44092. Charges are resisting arrest, failure to comply with a lawful order, and disorderly conduct. "And who is representing the defendant?" Judge Benson asked, his eyes scanning the paperwork. Denise stood up. Her voice was calm, perfectly modulated, and projected effortlessly to the back of the room. "I am representing myself, Your Honor." Bradshaw nudged Riley and snickered. "Watch this," he mouthed. Judge Benson finally looked up from his paperwork, but the lighting from the high windows caught the glare of his glasses, and he merely nodded at the defense table without fully registering the face of the woman standing there. "Very well, Ms. Harper. You understand the risks of representing yourself in a criminal matter?" Benson asked, rattling off the standard judicial warning. "I am fully aware of the procedural and evidentiary rules, Your Honor. We are here today on a preliminary motion to dismiss all charges based on the lack of probable cause and the submission of a falsified police report." A ripple of low whispers moved through the gallery. Defendants did not usually talk like that. They usually stumbled over their words or read shakily from a piece of notebook paper. Denise's syntax was sharp, her posture commanding. Riley frowned, stepping up to the podium. "Your Honor, the state objects. We have the arresting officer present. The arrest was perfectly lawful, and the defendant's motion is baseless." "Let's hear from the officer, then," Benson said, leaning back. "Take the stand, officer." Kevin Bradshaw swaggered down the center aisle. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and took his seat in the witness box. He adjusted the microphone, shooting a condescending smirk toward Denise. Riley began his direct examination. "Officer Bradshaw, could you please describe the events of the encounter on the corner of Broad and Walnut?" "Yes, sir," Bradshaw said, pitching his voice to sound professional and heroic. "I was on routine patrol when I observed a black Mercedes-Benz fail to yield at a stop sign. I initiated a traffic stop. When I approached the vehicle, the driver, the defendant sitting right there, was immediately belligerent." "And how so, officer?" "She was shouting, using profanity, refusing to hand over her license. I asked her 3 times to step out of the vehicle for my own safety as she kept reaching under the passenger seat. When I attempted to detain her, she physically resisted, pulling her arms away and trying to strike me. I was forced to use minimal necessary compliance techniques to secure the arrest." Riley nodded sagely. "A dangerous situation. Thank you, officer. Nothing further." Judge Benson turned to Denise. "Ms. Harper, you may cross-examine the witness." Denise picked up a single sheet of paper from her manila folder and walked slowly toward the podium. She did not look angry. She looked clinical. "Officer Bradshaw, Denise began, her tone conversational but piercing. "You testified that I failed to stop at the intersection of Broad and Walnut, is that correct?" "That's right," Bradshaw replied, jutting his chin out. "Are you aware that the intersection of Broad and Walnut is a four-way traffic light, not a stop sign, and that the light was flashing yellow in my direction, which under Philadelphia Municipal Code requires a driver to yield with caution, not to come to a complete stop?" Bradshaw blinked, slightly thrown. "It was a stop sign. You blew through it." "I see. We can pull the city planning records if needed, but let's move on to the interaction. You claimed I was shouting profanity. Did you have your body camera activated during this encounter as mandated by department policy?" Bradshaw shifted in his seat. This was the part he always hated, but he had his excuse ready. "My camera malfunctioned. The battery died earlier in my shift. I noted it in my log." The oldest lie in the precinct, Denise thought, keeping her face completely neutral. "How convenient," she stated flatly. "So there is no audio or video evidence of my alleged profanity or my physical resistance?" "There's my sworn testimony," Bradshaw fired back, his voice rising a fraction. "And my dash cam caught the initial stop before you were pulled out of the frame." "Excellent. Let's talk about that dash cam footage," Denise said. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I subpoenaed the dash cam footage this morning via an emergency discovery request, which the state graciously provided. I would like to submit it into evidence as Defense Exhibit A and play it for the court." Riley stood up. "No objection, Your Honor." The bailiff wheeled over a monitor and plugged in a flash drive. The screen flickered to life. It showed the dark street, Denise's Mercedes pulling over smoothly, Bradshaw's cruiser parked behind it. Bradshaw stepped out, but before he even reached her window, his hand was resting heavily on his unholstered taser. The video had no audio, but the visuals were damning enough. Denise did not reach under the seat. Her hands were clearly visible on the steering wheel the entire time. Bradshaw was seen gesturing aggressively, pointing his flashlight like a weapon. Then he yanked the door open, grabbed Denise by the shoulder, and dragged her out of the car. She did not struggle. She went entirely limp, a standard de-escalation tactic she had taught to civil rights activists for years. Bradshaw then slammed her against the hood of the cruiser, violently twisting her arms behind her back. The courtroom was deathly quiet. The video looped, playing the violent assault over again. "Officer Bradshaw," Denise said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of an approaching storm. "Could you point out the exact timestamp where I was trying to strike you?" Bradshaw's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "The angle is bad. You were pulling away. You can't see the micro-movements of resistance." "Micro-movements?" Denise repeated, letting the absurdity of the phrase hang in the air. "I see. And the bruises currently wrapping around my wrists, documented by the intake nurse at the county jail, were those a result of my micro-movements, or your failure to properly double-lock the handcuffs as required by your own use-of-force continuum?" "You don't know what you're talking about," Bradshaw spat, his temper finally cracking his professional veneer. "You civilians think you can read a Wikipedia page and suddenly you're legal experts. You broke the law. You resisted, and now you're trying to play the victim." Riley winced, realizing his witness was imploding. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is badgering the defendant." "The witness is hanging himself, Mr. Riley," Judge Benson murmured, leaning forward. The judge took off his glasses and finally truly focused his eyes on the woman standing at the podium. Benson squinted. He leaned over his massive oak bench, ignoring the red-faced police officer in the witness box, his gaze locked onto Denise. The sterile lighting of the courtroom suddenly seemed to catch her features clearly. The sharp jawline, the intense, calculating dark eyes, the familiar, unwavering posture that commanded respect in any room she walked into. Benson's heart skipped a beat. He looked down at the docket sheet in front of him. Defendant Denise Harper. He had glossed over the name, assuming it was a common coincidence, but seeing her stand there wielding the law like a scalpel, the pieces clicked together with the force of a freight train. At a judicial conference in Washington, D.C., Judge Harold Benson had heard the keynote speaker, a brilliant, fierce appellate lawyer who had just been confirmed to the federal bench. Her name was Denise Harper. Benson inhaled sharply. The heavy silence in the courtroom stretched tight, like a rubber band about to snap. "Counselor Riley," Judge Benson said, his voice dangerously low. Riley swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you know who you are prosecuting today?" Benson asked, his eyes never leaving Denise. Denise Harper, Your Honor, a local resident," Riley stammered, looking frantically at his case file, searching for something he might have missed. Benson slowly stood up. He did not just rise. He loomed over the courtroom. He looked at Officer Bradshaw, who was still sitting in the witness box, panting slightly from his outburst, looking thoroughly pleased with himself for putting the civilian in her place. "Officer Bradshaw," Judge Benson said, his voice echoing like thunder across the room, "you testified under oath that the defendant is a civilian who thinks she knows the law because she reads Wikipedia. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Bradshaw said, though his smugness wavered slightly at the judge's terrifying tone. Judge Benson turned his full attention back to the defense podium. He bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect that sent a shockwave through the gallery. "Your Honor," Judge Benson said softly, addressing Denise. The two words dropped into the courtroom like a live grenade. Riley froze. Bradshaw's jaw went slack, his eyes darting between the presiding judge and the black woman at the podium. "Your Honor," Benson repeated louder this time, "I must formally apologize for this court and for the absolute indignity you have suffered in my jurisdiction. What on earth are you doing at the defendant's table?" Denise Harper did not smile. She did not gloat. She looked at Judge Benson with the serene, unyielding gravity of a woman who held the scales of justice in her own hands. "I am here, Judge Benson, because I was violently removed from my vehicle, unlawfully detained, and falsely charged by an officer who believed his badge was a license to operate outside the confines of the United States Constitution," Denise stated, her voice ringing clear. "I chose to remain silent regarding my federal appointment because I wanted to see exactly how the citizens of this city are treated when they do not have the privilege of a title to shield them." Bradshaw's face lost all its color. It drained away instantly, leaving him looking like a ghost. His hands, gripping the edges of the witness stand, began to tremble uncontrollably. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind raced frantically. "Federal appointment, Your Honor," Denise said, turning her dark eyes toward the young prosecutor. "For the record, Mr. Riley, I am the Honorable Denise Harper, federal judge for the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. And the man sitting in your witness box just committed textbook perjury on the record in open court." The courtroom erupted. Whispers turned into gasps. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand instinctively resting on his radio. Riley looked like he was going to vomit. He dropped his pen, backing away from his own table as if it were on four. "I had no idea, Judge Harper. Your Honor, the state immediately—" "You can't just withdraw the charges, Mr. Riley," Denise said, her voice slicing through the panic. "Because I am not just moving to dismiss. I am officially requesting that this court hold Officer Kevin Bradshaw in contempt. And I am formally submitting this transcript to the Department of Justice to initiate a federal civil rights investigation under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law." She turned slowly, locking eyes with Bradshaw. The arrogant, untouchable cop from the encounter was gone. In his place sat a terrified, broken man who realized he had just ended his own career, his freedom, and his life as he knew it. all because he could not control his ego and his prejudice. "You see, Officer Bradshaw," Denise said quietly. The silence in the room was so profound that every syllable felt like a hammer strike. "You thought I didn't know the law? But I don't just know the law. I write the case law you are supposed to uphold." Judge Benson picked up his wooden gavel. He did not bang it. He held it tightly, his face a mask of absolute fury directed entirely at the witness stand. "Officer Bradshaw," Benson growled, "do not leave that box. Bailiff, secure the doors. Mr. Riley, call your district attorney right now. Tell him to get down here immediately, because we are not leaving this room until this officer is placed in the very same handcuffs he so eagerly abused." The heavy mahogany doors of the courtroom remained bolted shut by the bailiff. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted from standard municipal drudgery to the suffocating tension of a bomb squad trying to defuse a live wire. Officer Kevin Bradshaw sat completely frozen in the witness box. The arrogant smirk that had defined his career was entirely gone, replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of profound terror. His eyes darted toward the exit, then to his own duty belt, and finally down to his lap. He was trapped. For the first time in his life, the badge pinned to his chest was not a shield. It was a target. At the prosecution table, young ADA Scott Riley was having a full-blown panic attack. He was furiously texting under the table, his fingers trembling so badly he dropped his phone twice. He was a junior prosecutor, usually handling low-level misdemeanors and traffic tickets. He was absolutely unequipped to handle a federal judge invoking Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242 right in front of him. A frantic pounding echoed from the corridor. The bailiff unlocked the door, and District Attorney Victor Kane burst into the courtroom. Kane was a seasoned politician, a man who survived on glad-handing and keeping the police union happy. He was out of breath, his expensive tailored suit slightly wrinkled, trailed by two frantic-looking senior assistant prosecutors. "Judge Benson, what is the meaning of this?" Kane demanded, marching down the center aisle. "Take a very close look at the defense podium, Victor," Judge Benson said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "And then ask yourself if you want to use that tone in my courtroom." Kane stopped at the prosecution table. Annoyed, he turned to look at the defendant. It took a moment for the color to completely drain from the district attorney's face. He knew her. Every high-ranking prosecutor in the state knew her. Before her federal appointment, Denise Harper had absolutely decimated Kane's office in a landmark civil rights lawsuit that had cost the city millions. "Judge Harper," Kane whispered, all the bluster evaporating from his lungs. He looked at Riley, then at the terrified cop in the witness box. "Oh, God, what happened here?" "I'll tell you what happened, Mr. Kane," Denise said, her voice cutting through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. "Your officer, Kevin Bradshaw, unlawfully detained me. He assaulted me, falsified his police report, and just spent the last minutes committing blatant, unequivocal perjury under oath regarding his use of force and the circumstances of my arrest." "We withdraw the charges," Kane blurted out instantly, raising both hands as if to surrender. "Immediately, Judge Harper. This is a horrific misunderstanding, a terrible, terrible mistake by a patrolman. We will handle this internally, I assure you." "You will not handle anything internally, Victor," Denise interrupted. Her tone brokered absolutely no debate. "Because we both know how your internal handling works. Officer Bradshaw receives paid administrative leave. The union files a grievance, and he is quietly reinstated to terrorize another neighborhood." Kane swallowed hard, sweating profusely. "Judge, please. A federal civil rights investigation will tear this precinct apart. We can reach an agreement." "I'm not here to negotiate a plea deal for your corrupt department," Denise stated, opening her manila folder for the first time. "Let me be very clear about why I'm standing here, Mr. Kane." The courtroom went dead silent. Bradshaw's head snapped up, his eyes widening in pure shock. "What do you mean?" Judge Benson asked, leaning forward, his brow furrowed. "The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has been conducting a quiet preliminary audit of this specific precinct prompted by an unprecedented spike in Brady violations and excessive force complaints. I was asked to review the appellate risks." She pulled out a photograph and placed it on the podium. Officer Kevin Bradshaw's name appeared in dozens of separate civilian complaints. Every single one involved a black motorist. Every single one featured a malfunctioning body camera. Every single one was dismissed by your office, Mr. Kane. Kane looked like he was gonna be physically sick. "I knew his patrol route," Denise continued, her voice echoing with devastating finality. "I knew his shift. And I knew that if a black woman in a luxury vehicle drove through his sector at night, he wouldn't be able to resist. I didn't just catch him in a lie today. I proved a pattern of practice. I proved a Manel claim against the city." Bradshaw gripped the rail of the witness box. You baited me. You set me up," he stammered, his voice cracking. Denise turned her dark, piercing eyes entirely on him. "I drove the speed limit, Officer Bradshaw. I stopped at a traffic light. You set yourself up. I just gave you the rope, and you eagerly tied the noose." "Your Honor," a new, booming voice interrupted from the back of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung open again, and Frank Donnelly strode in. Donnelly was the senior defense attorney for the Fraternal Order of Police, a bulldog of a lawyer known for shielding dirty cops from the consequences of their actions. He carried a battered leather briefcase and wore a scowl that usually intimidated rookie ADAs into dropping charges. "I represent Officer Bradshaw," Donnelly announced, stepping through the swinging gate that separated the gallery from the well. "I am instructing my client to assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and I am filing an immediate motion for a mistrial and asking for Judge Harper to be sanctioned for judicial entrapment." Judge Benson slammed his gavel down so hard, the sharp crack made Riley jump out of his chair. "You will file nothing of the sort in my courtroom, Mr. Donnelly," Benson roared. "Your client is currently sitting in my witness box after lying to my face. The trial hasn't even concluded the preliminary motion phase, so your mistrial request is as legally illiterate as it is insulting." Donnelly did not flinch. He walked over to the witness box and stood between Bradshaw and Denise. "My client was under extreme duress. The defendant concealed her identity as a federal judge to deliberately manufacture a hostile encounter. She was under no legal obligation to announce her occupation during a routine traffic stop," Denise shot back, her legal mind shifting into high gear. "Furthermore, Mr. Donnelly, entrapment requires law enforcement to induce a person to commit a crime they otherwise would not have committed. I did not induce Officer Bradshaw to falsify a police report. I did not induce him to turn off his body camera. And I certainly did not induce him to sit in that chair and commit perjury today. He did that entirely of his own free will." Donnelly sneered. "It's your word against his regarding the body camera and the resistance. The dashcam footage is inconclusive." "Is it?" Denise asked, a terrifyingly cold smile finally touching the corners of her mouth. She reached into her manila folder and pulled out a small black rectangular device. It was a digital audio recorder. "While Officer Bradshaw's body camera conveniently died right before he assaulted me," Denise said, holding the device up, "my vehicle is equipped with a continuous 360-degree, high-definition dash and cabin recording system standard in the new Mercedes S-Class. But more importantly, anticipating this exact scenario, I was wearing a wire authorized by a federal warrant." Bradshaw let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The bulldog demeanor of his union lawyer, Donnelly, instantly evaporated. "I have the entire encounter recorded in crystal clear audio," Denise announced to the stunned room. "Would the court like to hear exactly what Officer Bradshaw said to me while he had my face pressed against the hood of his cruiser?" "Play it," Judge Benson ordered immediately, his face flushed with righteous anger. Denise pressed a button on the device and held it to the microphone on the podium. At first, there was the sound of rustling clothing and a loud, aggressive thud. Then, Bradshaw's voice, completely unvarnished and dripping with malice, filled the courtroom. "You think you're special, huh?" The recorded Bradshaw sneered. "You people get a little money, get a nice car, and think the rules don't apply to you. I'm going to teach you some respect tonight. Go ahead. Move a muscle. I'm begging you. Give me a reason to light you up." There was a brief pause on the tape, followed by the metallic click-click of handcuffs ratcheting brutally tight, accompanied by a sharp intake of breath from Denise. "Yeah, not so tough now, are you?" Bradshaw's recorded voice laughed. "When I write this up, you were swinging at me. Who's the judge going to believe? A street rat in a Mercedes or a sworn officer of the law? You're nothing." Denise clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was so absolute, so heavy it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. D.A. Victor Kane buried his face in his hands. He knew what this meant. This single audio recording did not just destroy Bradshaw. It destroyed every single open case Bradshaw had ever touched. It meant hundreds of convictions were about to be overturned. It was a career-ending nightmare for the DA's office. Donnelly slowly packed his legal pad back into his briefcase. He looked at Bradshaw, who was now weeping silently, his face buried in his hands. The union lawyer did not say a word. He just turned and walked away from the witness box, abandoning his client. There was no defending this. Judge Benson looked down at the disgraced officer. "Officer Bradshaw," Judge Benson said, his voice trembling with a rage that shook the very foundations of the courthouse. "In all my years on the bench, I have never witnessed such a flagrant, repulsive abuse of the badge. You are a disgrace to the uniform. You are a danger to the public." Benson turned to the bailiff, who was already stepping forward, a pair of heavy steel handcuffs unclipped from his belt. "Bailiff," Judge Benson commanded, "take this man into custody. He is to be held without bail on charges of aggravated perjury, filing a false police report, and felony deprivation of civil rights under color of law. And God help him when the federal prosecutors get here." The metallic snick of the bailiff's heavy steel handcuffs, closing around Officer Kevin Bradshaw's wrists, echoed like a gunshot in the stunned, suffocating silence of the courtroom. For years, Bradshaw had slapped those exact cuffs onto the wrists of frightened, marginalized, and thoroughly outmatched citizens. He had always done it with a vicious twist of the metal, treating the restraints not as a tool of the law, but as an extension of his own unchecked ego. Now, the cold metal bit into his own skin. His arms were wrenched forcefully behind his back by a bailiff who just moments earlier had offered him a friendly nod. The bailiff's grip on Bradshaw's bicep was entirely devoid of the usual fraternal police courtesy. It was the rigid, unforgiving grasp reserved for a dangerous felon. "Let's go, Bradshaw. Move it," the bailiff muttered, shoving him slightly forward. Bradshaw stumbled. His legs felt like lead beneath him. He was marched down the center aisle of the gallery, a perp walk in the very room where he had expected to be crowned the victor. He desperately kept his eyes glued to the scuffed wooden floorboards. He could not bear to look at the gallery where the few civilian spectators were watching him with a mixture of shock and profound satisfaction. He could not look at the prosecution table where Assistant District Attorney Scott Riley was sitting with his head buried in his hands, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. And most of all, Bradshaw did not dare look back at the defense podium. He knew that if he turned around, he would meet the gaze of the Honorable Judge Denise Harper. He could feel her eyes burning into his back, eyes as cold, deep, and unforgiving as a winter ocean. In minutes, she had surgically dismantled his entire existence without raising her voice above a conversational tone. The local municipal courthouse was swarming, but the earthquake had already begun to ripple outward, striking the precinct with devastating force. The shift at the station house was completely upended when a fleet of unmarked black SUVs screeched into the precinct parking lot. Dozens of federal agents wearing windbreakers with FBI stamped in bold yellow letters flooded through the double doors. They bypassed the front desk sergeant entirely, marching straight into the bullpen and the captain's office. Behind them followed evidence technicians carrying stacks of flat-packed cardboard boxes. The audio recording Denise had captured in her Mercedes did not just break her specific case. It provided the golden thread the Department of Justice needed to unravel the entire city's corrupt political machine. "Nobody touch a keyboard! Step away from your desks!" a senior FBI agent bellowed over the chaotic hum of the precinct. "This is a federal search warrant. We are seizing all hard drives, physical logbooks, and body camera docking stations. If you attempt to delete a file or send a text message from this moment forward, you will be charged with obstruction of justice." Panic, pure and unadulterated, swept through the room. The blue wall of silence, the unspoken sacred pact that cops protect cops, no matter what, instantly crumbled into dust under the terrifying weight of federal indictments. Survival instincts kicked in. Officer Kyle Donovan, a veteran who frequently rode patrol with Bradshaw, retreated toward the break room, his face pale and sweating. Before he could reach the back door, 2 federal agents flanked him. Officer Donovan was soon sitting in a soundproof room at the federal building, frantically demanding his union rep and a proffer agreement. When he realized the union would not touch this case with a 10-foot pole, Donovan began to sing. He detailed Bradshaw's long history of planting evidence, his aggressive targeting of black motorists in affluent neighborhoods, and the specific locker room tutorials Bradshaw gave on how to intentionally short-circuit body cameras before making a hard arrest. The dominoes were falling, and they were falling fast. Meanwhile, nearby at the district attorney's office, Victor Kane's political career was actively disintegrating. Kane's corner office felt like a bunker under siege. The phones at the front desk were ringing incessantly, a chorus of angry journalists, furious city council members, and panicked defense attorneys. The DA sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his tie loosened, an untouched glass of scotch sitting in front of him. His chief deputy burst into the room, waving a massive binder. "Victor, it's worse than we thought. The public defender's office just filed a mass injunction. Every single conviction where Kevin Bradshaw was the primary arresting officer or key witness is now compromised. We have massive Brady violations. The city is going to be sued into bankruptcy." Kane rubbed his temples, feeling a massive migraine splitting his skull. "And the DOJ, they just issued a press release," the deputy said grimly. "They aren't just looking at Bradshaw. They are opening a full pattern or practice investigation into our entire office for enabling civil rights violations. The mayor just called. He wants your resignation, or he's going on television to throw you under the bus himself." Kane stood behind a podium in the courthouse press room, blinded by the relentless, popping flashes of camera lenses. He looked haggard, his usual polished political armor entirely shattered. "Effective immediately," Kane told the throng of reporters, his voice wavering. "I am stepping down as district attorney. I take full responsibility for the oversight failures in my office." The reporters shouted over him, drowning out his hollow apologies with questions about Judge Harper and the systemic racism he had allowed to fester. But the hardest, most brutal karma was reserved strictly for the man who started it all. Kevin Bradshaw sat in a sterile, windowless interrogation room at the FBI field office. He had been stripped of his badge, his gun, his tactical vest, and his dignity. He was wearing an oversized, scratchy gray holding cell uniform. Across from him sat Rachel Bennett, a relentless, sharp-eyed federal prosecutor for the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Bradshaw's new defense attorney, a frantic, overpriced private lawyer named Philip Grant, hired only because the police union had officially severed all ties and funding for Bradshaw's defense, slid a printed document across the scarred metal table. "The state has officially dropped their misdemeanor charges against you, Kevin," Grant said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "But the DOJ is formally indicting you." Bradshaw stared blindly at the federal indictment. The legal jargon swam before his eyes, but the bold headers were impossible to ignore. Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. Prosecutor Bennett read aloud, her voice completely devoid of sympathy. "Aggravated perjury, obstruction of justice, and Mr. Bradshaw, we are tacking on a Section 241 conspiracy charge. It turns out your precinct buddies, specifically Officer Donovan, decided they did not want to go to federal prison for you. They've testified that you explicitly trained them on how to disable their cameras to conceal excessive force." Bradshaw's breath hitched in his chest. His hands trembled so violently that he had to press them flat against the table to keep them still. "I have a pension," he rasped, his voice sounding hollow, pathetic, and desperate. "I have almost 20 years on the force. My wife, the mortgage. They can't just take everything. Can we make a deal? I'll resign. I'll walk away today." Bennett leaned forward, clasping her hands on the table, her eyes locked onto his, entirely unmoved by his sudden display of vulnerability. "You don't seem to understand the reality of your situation, Mr. Bradshaw," Bennett said softly, though her words hit like a sledgehammer. "Under the terms of the Federal Forfeiture Act related to public corruption and felony civil rights violations, your pension is already gone. It will be seized to pay the inevitable restitution to the victims you framed. Your career is over. Your house will likely be sold to cover the civil suits." Bradshaw let out a choked, desperate sound. "The only thing we are negotiating in this room today," Bennett continued, tapping a perfectly manicured finger against the indictment, "is whether you will ever see the outside of a federal penitentiary before you turn 70 years old. And considering we have a crystal-clear audio tape of you threatening to light up a sitting United States federal judge while unlawfully restraining her, my office is not feeling particularly generous. We are seeking the maximum sentence." Bradshaw looked at Grant, begging his lawyer to perform a miracle, but Grant simply looked away, shaking his head slightly. There was no defense. There was no loophole. The system Bradshaw had so gleefully abused to destroy the lives of others had finally turned its massive, crushing gears onto him. Bradshaw buried his face in his hands, releasing a ragged, tearing sob that echoed uselessly off the concrete walls. The power trip was permanently over. The long, inescapable nightmare of consequence had just begun. Bradshaw shuffled into the courtroom. He shuffled because his ankles were shackled with heavy, dull steel chains that clinked loudly with every agonizing, restricted step. He wore a shapeless, glaringly bright orange prison jumpsuit with the letters U.S. Marshal stenciled in bold black ink across the back. The physical and psychological toll of time in federal holding had completely erased the arrogant, chest-puffing alpha male who had once strutted through life believing he was untouchable. His high and tight haircut had grown out into thinning, unkempt patches of graying hair. His skin had taken on the sallow, sickly pallor of a man who had not seen natural sunlight in a season. His eyes, once sharp and predatory, darted nervously around the wood-paneled room, carrying the deep, paranoid exhaustion of a disgraced ex-cop surviving among the very prison population he used to brutalize. He looked incredibly small. Presiding over the sentencing was Chief Federal Judge Warren Holloway. Holloway was a towering, formidable figure in federal jurisprudence, a man whose reputation for zero tolerance regarding law enforcement corruption was legendary across the Eastern Seaboard. He sat elevated behind the massive mahogany bench, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he methodically turned the pages of a thick pre-sentencing report. Sitting in the front row of the gallery, completely still, was the Honorable Denise Harper. She wore an immaculate, perfectly tailored navy blue suit. Her posture, as flawless and unyielding as it had been on the day she was unlawfully arrested. She was not presiding over a docket today. She was not prosecuting. She was present simply as the victim of the crime. Yet as she watched Bradshaw take his seat beside his court-appointed attorney, she looked like anything but a victim. She looked like the architect of a necessary, righteous destruction. "Mr. Bradshaw," Judge Holloway's voice boomed from the bench, deep and resonant, instantly silencing the low murmurs in the gallery. "You stand before this court today, having pleaded guilty to 3 federal felonies. I note for the record that you did not plead guilty out of a sudden strike of conscience or a profound moral awakening. You pleaded guilty because the evidence against you, specifically the audio recording captured by the victim and the subsequent testimonies of your own precinct colleagues, was so overwhelmingly, irreparably absolute that proceeding to trial would have been an exercise in sheer delusion." Bradshaw stood at the defense table, his head bowed, staring blankly at the polished oak surface. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, shaking violently. "You violated your sacred oath," Holloway continued, his tone dripping with profound disgust. "You weaponized the law to inflict terror on a citizen based purely on your own racial animus and an inflated, grotesque ego. You believed your badge granted you immunity from the very laws you were sworn to enforce." Holloway paused, looking toward the front row of the gallery. "Before I hand down this sentence, the court recognizes the Honorable Judge Denise Harper, who has submitted a victim impact statement. Judge Harper, the floor is yours." Denise stood slowly. She did not walk to the podium. She simply stepped to the edge of the gallery railing, commanding the absolute attention of every single soul in the room. Bradshaw physically flinched at the sound of her chair pushing back, instinctively shrinking away as if anticipating a physical blow. "Your Honor," Denise began, her voice steady, melodic, and ruthlessly precise. "Kevin Bradshaw did not apologize to me today. He has not apologized since my unlawful arrest. The tears he sheds now are not born of remorse for his actions, nor for the damage he has done to the community he was supposed to serve. He is only sorry that the black woman he violently threw against the hood of a police cruiser in the dead of night happened to possess the federal authority to stop him." She took a slow step forward, her dark eyes locking onto Bradshaw's trembling frame. He refused to look up at her. "If I had been a nurse driving home from a grueling shift at the hospital," Denise continued, the volume of her voice never rising, yet filling every corner of the room, or a teacher returning from a late PTA meeting, or a mother simply running an errand, he would be back on the streets tonight. He would be wearing that badge, hiding behind his malfunctioning body camera, hunting for his next target. He used the color of his skin, the authority of his uniform, and the darkness of that street to try and break me. But he fundamentally misunderstood what true power is. Power is not a taser, Officer Bradshaw. It is not heavy steel handcuffs, and it is certainly not perjury. Power is the United States Constitution, and it is entirely immune to your intimidation." Denise paused, letting the absolute truth of her words settle over the courtroom like a heavy, suffocating blanket. "I do not seek his imprisonment for revenge, Judge Holloway," Denise stated, her gaze shifting back to the bench. "I seek it as a quarantine. A man who uses a badge as a weapon of prejudice is a pathogen in a democratic society. He actively rots the foundation of public trust. He strips citizens of their constitutional rights in the dark. It is only fitting and scientifically necessary for the health of our justice system that the Constitution strips him of his liberty in the unforgiving light of day. Thank you, Your Honor." She sat back down. The silence that followed was absolute, reverent, and incredibly heavy. Judge Holloway removed his glasses and looked down at Bradshaw. There was no pity in his eyes. "Kevin Bradshaw, you are a disgrace to the uniform you wore and a danger to the public you swore to protect. For the deprivation of civil rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, and systemic perjury, I sentence you to 12 full years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. You will serve this time in a maximum security facility. There is no possibility of early parole in the federal system. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay complete financial restitution to the victims of your falsified reports, and upon your eventual release, you are permanently barred from holding any public office, carrying a firearm, or holding any position of authority for the rest of your natural life." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a resounding, deafening crack. Bradshaw's knees completely buckled. He collapsed against the defense table, letting out a horrific guttural wail of pure despair. 2 United States Marshals immediately stepped forward. They caught him under the armpits, hauling him upright without an ounce of gentleness. The chains around his ankles clattered loudly as they dragged him backward toward the holding cell door. He was a ruined man, weeping openly, being hauled away to a cage of his own making. Denise Harper watched him disappear through the heavy steel door. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply closed her eyes for a brief second, took a deep breath, and picked up her leather briefcase. She nodded respectfully to Judge Holloway, turned and walked out of the courtroom. Her footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, steady and entirely unbothered. She was heading back to her own chambers to continue the real work. Justice had not just been served. It had been flawlessly weaponized against the very corruption that sought to destroy it. True justice is rarely a swift stroke of lightning. It is often a grueling uphill battle against systems designed to protect their own. The story of Officer Bradshaw and Judge Harper serves as a stark, dramatic reflection of a very real, enduring crisis in modern policing. The arrogance of unchecked power thrives in silence and compliance, relying on the vulnerability of its victims to maintain the status quo. However, when the veil of immunity is finally pierced by undeniable proof and unwavering legal intellect, the consequences are devastatingly absolute. Denise's victory was not just in sending a corrupt officer to a federal penitentiary. Her victory lay in exposing the insidious blue wall and forcing the system to cannibalize its own corruption. It reminds us that no badge is heavier than the Constitution, and that true accountability, when it finally arrives, strikes with the unyielding force of a judge's gavel. Never underestimate the quiet power that lives inside every person who refuses to be broken. In a world that sometimes lets badges and uniforms hide cruelty, this story reminds us that true justice isn't loud or flashy. It moves with patience, dignity, and unshakable courage. One woman chose silence not out of fear, but out of strength. She let a bully in uniform believe he held all the cards, only to reveal that real power doesn't come from force or fear. It comes from knowing the law, respecting yourself, and standing firm when no one else will. This is more than a tale of one corrupt officer getting caught. It's a powerful reminder that every act of arrogance eventually meets its reckoning, and that the most dangerous weapon against injustice is an informed, fearless heart. No matter how dark the moment feels, never forget, the truth has a way of rising, and those who abuse their power will one day face someone who refuses to stay silent. Let this story sink deep into your soul and fuel your own quiet courage. If it moved you, touched you, or reminded you to stand taller in your own life, drop a comment below and tell me, what's the biggest lesson you're taking away today? Which part hit you the hardest? And if you believe in stories that inspire real strength and real justice, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful message. Your support keeps these important voices alive. Thank you for being here. Together, we keep believing that doing the right thing still matters.